Welcome to another edition of Pro Paintball Weekly. I'm your host E-Money, and today we're talking the NXL LA Open recap. And what an exciting event it was, folks. Let me tell you, I was surprised as anyone to see some of these teams coming and going and who was in the quarters and who was in the semis. Although it was a semi-controversial win, we have to hand it. Let's give it to them. Ironmen. The new Ironmen could be the resurrection of the Ironmen, as some are saying. Obviously the most early Dynasty in paintball. Obviously before Dynasty, for those of you that don't remember Pro Paintball way back when. But nonetheless, Ironmen did what it took. They came on in the finals, took it to overtime, and ended up defeating the Russians for their first win in the NXL. And again, their first win, of course, in the 2007 season. And of course, puts them in first place in the standings. So again, we have to congratulate the Ironmen for doing what it takes. But let me tell you, I think it was the key additions we talked about last week that I was not sure that they could contribute early, but let me tell you, they sure did. And that, of course, was Nicky Cuba, one of these guys that snuck in on me too, as well as the one as billed as the greatest paintball player of all time, according to B. Young's. That's Mike Paxson. Another key pickup there. There was a not a controversial, but a key point late in the second quarter. It was a 2-on-3. It was, again, Nicky Cuba and the only Mike Paxson. These guys, again, 2-on-3 versus the Russians, and they pulled it out and got that point, and that's what turned the tide. I think was the key point to win it, obviously, other than the overtime one for the Ironmen. I was a little surprised at the Russians' behavior. They played very uncharacteristically undisciplined. 2 5-minute major penalties in that match, and it looked like, obviously, when the penalties weren't in effect, that they were in control, but again, one was questionable. The second one was really, there was an incident with trash talking, and some people felt it was a little excessive call, but nonetheless, 2 of those penalties, 2 5-minute majors, makes it difficult for anybody to win. So it was the Ironmen's day, and they had what it took. I was very surprised that the Russians let it go to overtime. Came in overtime, both teams were at full strength. I thought for sure the Russians were going to take it, but again, they did not have it, so got to hand it off to the Ironmen, all their hard training, as a teamwork, everything, they put it together. So again, a big win there for the Ironmen. Of course, the big dollars to go along as that. Again, we talked about Boston again, uncharacteristic. And again, I was very surprised. I was not the Boston team I was used to seeing. So they have to settle for second place, but I think that will keep them hungry. Obviously, first and second place isn't that big of a point spread, so it's not, I don't think Boston's going to hear it now. Oh, it's over, the reign's over, et cetera, et cetera. Although a lot of their preliminary scores were a lot closer than last year, and so they didn't exactly just cruise through everything. So they had some hard-fought games to get to where they did. All right, moving on, the boys in blue, that's right, Dynasty takes third place, and Dynasty was looking great. I have to say, they with new uniforms, new everything else, the pinstripes, looking good for Dynasty. And again, cruised through the preliminaries, did very well in the quarters, then come the semis versus the Ironmen. And wow, it was instantly one of those days where every break was going the Ironmen's way. I think the final score was 13-3, and I think one of those 3 points, or maybe even 2 of those, where I saw the whole game, were almost a gimme point. It was bad from worse to down. You could tell it just off the break they lose 3 guys, and they all just look at each other and be like, okay, it's one of those. But I have to hand it to them, especially Ryan Greenspan. Kind of held in there. And I mean, for me personally, that's when I would say, okay, hey, let's put the new guys in or try some new lines and at least get something out of this experience, because you could tell early on it just wasn't their day, and towards middle of the second half it was like, hey, well, let's experiment a little bit, because there's no way we're going to turn this around. But Greenspan hung in there tough, pulled out some big moves, aggressive moves. So again, definitely played up to the crowd a little bit, but it was definitely not Dynasty's game, that game, and just could not turn around. And Ironmen just built off that, I think, is what gave them the boost there to take on the Russians. But Dynasty, again, still looking strong, just had that one bad game at a bad time. As we talked about last show, things 1, 2, 3 are kind of about where we put them at. The big surprise now is 4 and 5, and we'll get to that. Excessive. 4th place, who would have thought? Everyone thought, last place, they're done, you know, Telford's boys, it's over. Some say they had an easy preliminary. Okay, they beat Ultimate, which, okay, we'll get a little of that, although they did beat Legacy, and that was a big win. Again, they lost their 3rd game. But this is the big one. They beat Oakland in the quarterfinals, and Oakland was red hot, and that's another surprise we'll get to, and they definitely proved me wrong. But beat Oakland in the quarters, moved to the semis, and again, they ran into the Russian freight train and could not compete. But nonetheless, 4th place to excessive. I got to hand it to Rich Telfer and those guys. That's a great way to put a statement for this year to say, hey, you know what? And I think Maximus called it last week, although that show got erased. But he said, hey, watch for Excessive now that the pressure's off. And they delivered. So hats off to Excessive with the 4th place. All right, 5th place, huge surprise. And yes, bring the phone calls, bring the emails. I will take it. I was wrong. Oakland Assassins dominated the preliminaries, winning all their games. No one could stop them, but ran into Excessive in the quarters, and that was it. So moving on, Jacksonville Raiders. And again, I have to say I do apologize for the misinformation last show. Yes, Jacksonville obviously was in the 2006 complete season, although I was not sure after the takeover with Miami how many players were Doc's and what decisions were his. But nonetheless, for 2007, it was all Doc's players, all Doc's franchise, and I predicted great things. And they did very well until they met a Dynasty freight train there in the quarterfinals. And I think you'll see those guys next tournament a little hungry, ready to pay back Dynasty a little bit, and possibly a 3rd or 4th, maybe even a 2nd place